We all go through pain. There's not one person who's listening to this who hasn't experienced something painful or is experiencing something painful. And I believe that our message always comes from our mess.
Yeah,
and
I do
we
believe.
can help other people with turning that into something beautiful. And so that's really what the ending of the book is about, is just those experiences. And then even as an adult experiencing really painful losses, and then using that pain and turning it into something better.
Thank you so much for being here, Aimee. I have listened to your podcast twice, and excuse me, my voice is going for some reason. I had allergies and then it turned into this. So, but I'm really excited to dive into your story and to hopefully help at least one person that might be struggling with a similar situation, or somebody that has somebody in their life that's struggling with a similar situation, to know that they're not alone. And by you opening up, which is very brave of you, it's, a vulnerable situation. And hopefully that'll help them, anybody out there, feel that they can open up as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. That really means a lot to me. In fact, in my book, that's like one of the things I talk so much about, is just, if this can help one person, like, that's why I wrote it. That's why I'm talking about it. That's why I'm here. And so that means a lot. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I feel like we have to keep our situations in check. I ask myself, am I here because I've got somebody posting on my, my accounts and like hopefully building awareness? Am I here because it's an ego thing? No, I'm this is a lot of work. And really, honestly, truly, like, I would stop tomorrow if I hadn't gotten that message yesterday that said, oh my gosh, like, thank you so much. This has been so helpful for me. Like, I just didn't know, I wasn't able to process what I was going through until I heard it out of somebody else's story, their mouth, whatever. So yeah.
That's so powerful.
It is. I'm sure you get similar messages.
Yeah. In fact, the first podcast I did, where I was so scared to talk about it, because I had never talked about it publicly ever my whole life. And I was so nervous to do that podcast. And I had just so many messages flood in after that podcast. And that almost that flame that was already there, it grew immensely, because when I started getting these messages from people, like, I went through the exact same thing. I didn't know any, so many people went through this, and it just meant so much to me. And that's when I realized, like, this stuff needs to be talked about. Not just what I went through, just childhood trauma in general. I'm just such a believer. Like, you hold it in, it suffocates you. You let it out, you release it. It suppresses you. Yeah. And when you let it out and release it, you are releasing it, and it's powerful. And then you're helping other people let go of their stories as well. So
100%. Yeah. I was talking to Esther, who's my half sister, today, and we were talking a little bit about like growth and what we have to go through to get to grow. And sometimes, you have to put yourself through those hard things. You have to go through it to grow through it. She's like, yeah, we were, my husband and I, we were seeing a counselor, and he'd say, lean into the chainsaw, lean into it.
I love that.
And I'm like, okay, I'm going to use that one.
That's good. Lean into the chainsaw. Yeah, I like that.
So, yeah. So, well, I'm just going to let you take the floor and tell me, start wherever you'd like, and tell me about, your journey, and don't be afraid to just get right to it, or tell as much of the lead up you think is important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think where I'll probably start is, let me kind of start by what motivated me to get to where I am now at this phase of my life, which actually started about 17 years ago. So 17 years ago, I went through a divorce with my first husband, and it was ugly. It was painful. I made a lot of mistakes in that divorce, and those mistakes drove me into a therapist office. And that was the first time that I had ever, I'd been to therapists before. I'd been to multiple marriage counselors, because my first marriage was just so toxic. But I'd never been to a therapist just to work on me. And these things that were going on in my life drove me to a therapist office just to work on me. And so I want to share that story because that's really where my life turned around, was the day I went to see her. So it was a friend who had recommended her, and I had called this friend and said, hey, I really, I don't want a marriage counselor. I don't want a church recommended counselor. I need someone who can help me. And I had called her because she had told me, ironically, 2 weeks before this, out of the blue, that she had met this new therapist. It was changing her life. I'm like, who is this woman? Maybe I need to go see her. And so she gave me her name and number, had an appointment the following week. And it was just this older woman. You could just tell she'd been picking people's brains for 50 years, just really had been doing this a long time. And so she goes, why are you here? And she was just one of those women, right? Just got direct, right to the point. And she said, okay, Aimee, why are you here? I said, well, I've been in this marriage for almost 13 years, and
You were still in the marriage at the
I was
time?
not divorced yet.
Okay.
And I said,
But separated or?
Getting there.
Okay.
I knew it, something needed to happen. I just didn't know how or what.
You thought maybe the therapist could help with the marriage or help you decide what to do with it? Or had you already in your mind thought that there's no possible way? And
I figured it needed to end. I think I just needed someone to say, yes, this is so bad, it needs to end.
Yeah.
And so she said, okay, why don't we start with your marriage? Tell me about your marriage. So I spent 30 minutes telling her about the last 13 years of my life. And she basically just said, okay, I'm going to stop you right there. She said, you need to get out. And I'm not talking walk, I'm talking run. End this marriage. There's nothing salvageable here. It is bad. It is toxic on every level. You need to get out.
Yeah.
So she said, okay, we're going to put that on the shelf for right now. We'll get back to your marriage, I'm sure, at some point. But what I really want to understand is, why did you stay for 13 years? And this is what I loved so much about her, is she knew how to dig. And that was the first time I'd ever seen someone who knew how to ask the right questions and who knew how to dig. And this is why I even want to expand on this more than I even do in my book or I have on other podcasts, because I think so many people maybe who have gone to therapists or maybe didn't have a great experience are like, oh, I tried that. Okay. I must have gone to 8 or 9 different therapists, counselors, whatever, and none of them were the right person. You have to find the right person who knows how to help you.
I agree. I have people who have such mixed feelings about counselors, and I got lucky. I had an amazing counselor from, my very first visit, and stuck with him for 7 years on a weekly basis, and it changed my life. I wouldn't be the mom or the person that I even am today without him. But I know of so many other people who have had really bad experiences. And I don't know if I don't ever want to talk bad about counseling, because I think it's such a worthy thing to do. Even if you think you don't have problems, it's so good to talk to somebody who might be like, okay, but you have things to work on. You know, we all can be continuing to grow. And so I think that's a very good point. I'm glad you brought it up.
In fact, a story I share in my book, which is to this day, I still laugh about this. So it was years ago, actually, before I met this therapist, I was seeing another therapist, and I was talking to a good friend of mine who was going to therapy. And I was like, why are you going to therapy? And it's just so funny, because she was like, I'm going to therapy. And she was just kind of telling me about her childhood. She goes, I had the most amazing mom, and I'd come home every day and there were homemade cookies waiting for us. And she just made dinner every night and just was this amazing mom. And now that I'm a mom, I can't live up to it. I don't want to bake. I don't want to make cookies for my kids. I don't want to cook dinner every night. She works. She goes, I love working. I love being gone. I love time to myself. And I'm sitting here thinking, I'm in therapy trying to work through all this trauma. And here she is going to therapy because her mom was a good mom. I'm like, nobody escapes it.
Right. No.
Nobody
you
escapes
feel the guilt.
It. Yeah.
And women, especially
women.
We take on guilt. We're like, Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that was my first realization. That was so many years ago, but just realizing we all have stuff to work through, even if it's good, quote, quote, good stuff. It's still, we have to work through it because we become adults and then we start to process things differently.
Yeah. And if we don't, then it can affect us differently. It'll be a reaction instead of sometimes I react and I'm like, okay, where did that come from? Oh, okay, I was jealous, I was this, I was that, which I'm not that type of person, but I can get into situations where my body just takes over, right? And I'm like, I'm not coaching myself properly. And I'm like, okay, you're being unrealistic right now. Stop.
I know. So she was just so good at that, And so she just said, okay, we're going to put your marriage on the shelf for a minute. We'll get there. It needs to end, but I want to understand why did you stay with this man for 13 years?
Which is what's going to help you with your next relationship.
Yes, exactly. And so she's like, okay, so where I want to start is she goes, I want you to tell me about all the relationships you've had with men. Maybe if I can kind of understand like your background a little bit, this will kind of help me understand why you stayed here for so long. So she goes, just like maybe from 16 on, like tell me about all the relationships you had, which were, I got married at 20. So 4-year space there. It was like 4 or 5, boyfriends or whatever. So I kind of walk her through all these relationships and she's like, she just looks at me like total silence. And she's like, have you ever been in a healthy relationship with a man before? And I just sat there and I was like, no, I have not. Now that you asked me that question, never once have I thought about that until this moment. So here I am at 32. For the first time in my life at 32 years old, someone asking me if I've ever been in a healthy relationship with a man. And I was just like, oh my goodness. And then her next question was, what happened to you as a child? And my very first reaction was nothing. I said, nothing happened to me. I grew up in a great home and I did. I had great parents and I did. And, super religious family, blah, blah, all the things. And I said, I had a great childhood. And she goes, no. She goes, we're going to stay here for a minute because I have done this long enough to know that when you spend 20 something years or 20 years in unhealthy relationships with men, that came from somewhere, from something, and we need to dig a little bit to figure it out. So it took about 20, maybe 30 minutes of her just kind of probing and asking questions, bringing up, okay, did you, tell me about your extended family? And I know what she was looking for. She was looking for an abuse somewhere. And then finally, I was like, oh, wait a minute. I said, there was actually this one really small thing that happened with my brother when I was like 12, but I'm like, it was like no big deal. She goes, why don't you tell me about that? And so I tell her about this abuse that happened with my older brother. And
how old was your brother when you were 12?
He was 16.
Okay.
So I was 12, he was 16. And so I told her about it and she just kind of started asking questions about that and probing. Okay, how long did it last? Like, okay, tell me all the details. And so
how long did it last?
About a year from what I remember.
On a regular basis, weekly basis?
Probably like, yes, regular, because there wasn't one night that I would go to sleep and not be scared he was coming in. So I know it happened regularly enough for that fear to just always be there. Like that fear was just always there. Like,
and was it only at night that you were living in fear? Like, did you get up in the morning and have breakfast around a table or go to church or, head into the minivan or whatever to go to school? Were there other awkward moments during those times of the day?
No, but there were times where my parents would like leave and I was scared to be left alone with him.
Okay.
For sure. I was scared to be alone with him. So I just always made sure I wasn't. But really the fear.
Did he pick up on that, your fear, do you think?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Actually, I really don't know on that.
Do you think that he was doing any of those things with any of your other siblings?
Probably going to let that one lie if that's okay. Just because I just want to tell my story and nobody else's.
Yeah, for sure.
So it just like, it was regular enough where I just know like it was enough, but yeah, so I started telling her about this thing, but it was interesting because it was like, I had never talked about it before. Actually, hold on, let me back up. It's not that I'd never talked about it before. I'd never talked about it with anybody but my brother. So when I was in college, my brother actually apologized. One day, I can't remember. I just remember him saying, Aimee, hey, I'm really sorry about what happened when we were kids. And I was like, it's okay. Because back then I was just like, no big deal. Like, because
trying to forget about it.
Like, yeah, it's no big deal. Like, because my parents had told me to forget about it. So I truly did forget about it. So when he brought it up when we were in college, because like we were both living in Provo at the time, I was like, oh no, it's no big deal. It's forgotten. It literally was forgotten. In fact, when he brought it up, it was like so out of the blue. And then it was never really brought up again. And so that's why it took a while for that to like get uncovered, because I literally did not make it a part of my life, my story, my past. Like my parents told me to pretend it never happened. Because they just, I credit this to so many things, church stuff, just how it was in the 80s and 90s. This stuff was never talked about. It's not like we had social media back then. There were no therapists online telling people how to like love themselves. There was no awareness of anything.
Yeah.
So I think it happened a lot, not just in church culture, but very much in this church culture it happened. And my parents just literally just wanted to forget it ever happened in that family so that they could feel like our family was normal again.
Right.
I don't fault them for that. Like, I mean, I even think back to, man, if I would have been a mom in the 90s, would I have done it any different? Maybe not.
Yeah.
Can't even say that I would have. I mean, I would like to think I would have.
We have different tools now.
We have different tools, yeah. And so I just, I just forgot about it. Like I can even remember, it's crazy. I have this memory of like sitting on one end of my couch, my brother on the other end of the couch, my parents in the middle, and my parents just saying, Aimee, you need to forgive him because God forgave him and he's going to go on a mission. And
was he like just a mess?
No.
Well,
he could have been on his own, not in front of me.
Yeah. He just scared and just
probably scared.
Docile.
And he wanted to go do this thing. He wanted to go on a mission and he had to say sorry in order to do that, And so my parents were just like, okay, you need to forgive him because God did. And I was like, okay, I'm a little 12-year-old girl. I mean, what else am I going to say?
You're going to do exactly what your parents advised you of.
And then my parents said, do you want to talk to anybody? And I was like, no. Like, that's the last thing I wanted to do was talk to somebody.
Right. Why would I want to bring this all up?
I was like, no, I don't want to talk to anybody about this.
Lift up that rug, put it down deep in there.
Literally. And that was it. Like that little couch conversation, that's all there was for healing back then. And so it just never was talked about, forgotten. And then, now I'm a 16-year-old girl and fast forward a few years and I've got all sorts of hormones going on. I remember being 13. In fact, I talk a lot about this in my book because I really want to raise awareness for what sexual abuse does to a young child. Because it's like once the windows open sexually, there's no closing it.
Right.
There's no closing that door.
You can't unsee something, and it.
And I talk very openly. It
imprints on you.
Yes.
Whether it's in a good or a bad way.
Yes. And that's why I talk so openly about it because it's like I especially want parents to know, like if there's a parent listening to this, a mom that's listening to this and they know their child has already experienced something, even if it's small, like once a child feels something sexually, it's so confusing to them because it's such an adult thing to feel and they're a child with child emotions and child mentality. They won't know what to do with that except they'll want it again. And that's what happened to me, right? I'm this 13-year-old girl now and I've been completely woken up sexually. I was already in puberty when it started. And so I was already starting to feel things in my body that I didn't understand. And now you add being touched on top of that and having those emotions and feelings and having it feel good. And then all of a sudden it stopped. And I remember, and I had so much guilt and shame about this. I literally my entire childhood thought I was going to hell. Because I would go to church and they would talk about like, if you've done anything unmoral or unclean, like you're going to, go to hell or whatever. And I'm sitting here in church every week, like,
that's so heavy.
I'm going to hell because I have all these unpure thoughts and I want to be touched again. And it was so confusing to me because I knew it was wrong that my brother was doing it, but it felt good. It really messed me up emotionally.
I'm so sorry.
It's crazy to think about. Even like thinking back, like there's this one story I talk about in my book where I had this best friend and I thought her brother was cute. And I remember one day saying, oh, your brother is so cute. And she's like, that's so gross. What a normal girl would say, right? And it was actually confusing to me that she didn't think her own brother was cute because there was no boundary there for me. I didn't understand why she didn't find her brother attractive.
Right.
Because I had already been aroused by my brother. So that was normal to me.
Right. We don't know what normal is. We know what our normal is.
There is no normal after you've been sexually abused.
That is your normal.
That's your new normal.
That is your normal. That is your life.
Yeah.
Unless you see behind a curtain of somebody else's life and then you're like, okay, which one of them is normal? Which one of them's right? And especially if you're at an age where
totally
you're still asking the question.
And it was never talked about. Sex was so taboo. We don't have sex. Don't ever talk about sex. My parents never talked to me about sex. So it's just like I had no awareness of anything. And yet here I was totally woken up to all these feelings and emotions and thoughts. And I just had no way to navigate any of it. So it's crazy. It's a lot, right? It's like heavy to think back on.
How long did you see your counselor? So let's go back to that counselor that you found. Yeah. She sounds amazing.
She was amazing. She actually passed away last year, which was, gosh,
I was going to say I need to have her on the show.
Right? Oh my goodness. In
a way, I do have her on the show with you being here.
She changed so many lives. Like I dedicated my entire book to her because she truly just changed my life.
I love that. I'm trying to get my counselor of 7 years on the show.
Oh.
I actually saw somebody that we used that knows him, and I'm like, I need to get a hold of Josh. I need to like Zoom him in at least.
I would love that, and I'll tell you why. I've actually had a lot of people reach out to me since my book came out and some of the other podcasts asking like, who do you recommend? Because, they'd heard that my therapist had passed away last year, and I was just like, man, I would love someone to be able to
connect with again like that.
Connect with again and share that with other people that I know need help, because there's a lot of people out there that are scared to find a therapist, or maybe they tried and it didn't, kind of like what we talked about, like they didn't have a great experience.
Yes.
So yeah, she just truly changed my life. So it's like once that story came out, and then it was like the more she probed, the more details came out. It was like by the end of this, what was supposed to be a 1 hour appointment, by the end of this 2 hour appointment, I walked out of there with just like, my eyes were opened, like so open to, wow, like what the F?
Right. And was it like opening up the wound again, or
Yes.
like maybe not even again, because you never even let it be open. You've always just been like, no, that's not an emotion we deal with. That's not something I think of.
Yeah.
I can't, your mental state couldn't handle it anyways. And now that you have this counselor, your mentally, you're saying to yourself, so let me say that again. You can take that out. So mentally, as you're going through that first, counseling session, you were going through it and you were not trying to share that information. But once you got in it and started sharing it and she was probing more and more and more, your mind is saying, it's okay. You can open up. You can have this conversation. This is a safe space, because there's so many things that we can't process that would just ruin us mentally. And that was one of them for you. But in that first session, she got you to a point where your mind was like, nope, we're going to be okay here. You can let it out. We can talk about it. Let's do it.
Well, and even when it first came out, it still in my mind was so small. Because I even remember saying it to her. I was like, yeah, it was just this, it was this really small thing that happened with my brother. And then it was just like, and then after that appointment, the more appointments we had, and she could really start teaching me like, Aimee, let's walk through how this has actually impacted you when it comes to men. Mm-hmm. How you connect with men, the men that are attracted to you, the men that you've had relationships with, your current husband, why you stayed for 13 years. I mean, my inability to say no to men at that point in my life was, it took over. I had no ability to say no to men.
It's non-existent.
Because I could never say no to my brother, because that was part of the pattern that got created there. And I learned this with her is, so I'll share more about what happened with my brother. So what he would do is he would come into my room at night when he thought the whole house was sleeping. So like 1, 2 in the morning, I would hear the door open. And I would pretend I was asleep because I was so scared. I was so scared to say something. I didn't want to confront him. I didn't, I was embarrassed. I just was like, oh my gosh, I got to pretend I'm asleep. Mm-hmm. And so I would pretend I was asleep, and he would touch me everywhere until he felt like stopping, and then he would leave. And then I was just left there, just feeling all the things. And so not being able to stand up to him, even though I was awake every time it happened, it like left this imprint on me of never being able to stand up to men, never being able to say no, never be able to fight for myself or love myself enough to even say anything.
I live with that, not to the degree that you do, but I have that same thing. And it's like, and I'm not leading anybody on, but in the same sense, if I were able to use that word no without feeling guilty or without feeling like afraid, it would be less like leading somebody on. Like we need to be able to say no. Otherwise men can be like, well, you didn't tell me no. Yeah. Like, and so therefore you led me on. You're being promiscuous. Trust me, on the inside, I'm like, no to the hell no. But I'm like trying to work around every angle so it doesn't get to that. I'm like, okay, I can obviously see that this person thinks that there's going to be something else other than friendship here. And how do I tell him that we're just business partners? We're in a business situation, whatever it is, we're friends. That's not going to happen. Well, it's very easy for healthy people to say that, to get their point across. Yeah. But I've struggled with that, and so it's led into situations where it's not healthy. And it's like, well, I could have done something in the very beginning and been like, whoa, we're just friends,
Yeah.
like a simple little thing. And instead I would just avoid, like try and rearrange the conversation or avoid being around that person in like just the two of us, or, because I could sense that it was going to go down that path if he had his way. And if I didn't say something, which I was too afraid, I didn't know how to.
Yeah. That's the thing that I think people don't understand when they haven't had to deal with that. It's like, you want to say no. Like everything inside of me wanted to scream and say no. I mean, I can remember being that little girl that just wanted to scream out. You want them to
know already, though.
Yeah, right?
Not to. You and just prefer that them
exactly
know that this is bad behavior. What made you think that this was okay?
Yeah. But then you fast forward and now you're an adult who can't say no. It's a whole different game.
Talking about as an adult.
Yeah, right. Yeah. As an adult who can't say no. Like it's very disempowering in so many ways. And so that was, I mean, if I could describe my life in any word, with any word, back when I was 32, it was just, I was so disempowered. I had no personal power. I had no ability to stand up for myself or represent myself or even love myself enough to walk away from my horrible marriage that I was in. And so it's like, once we started doing all that digging, it's like, hey, let's get to the bottom of this. I mean, I worked with her twice a week for 9 months before I was really able to feel like I had changed on the inside and disempowered all those patterns that had been built at such a young age. I mean, it doesn't take, I mean, I tell people this all the time, like when you have patterns that have been in your, here inside of you for 20 plus years, those don't go away with a couple therapy sessions. I mean, you're talking months and months of therapy, a lot of personal work, a lot of internal dialogue to shift and to change. And it was a painful 9 months. It was not an easy 9 months in my life. I went through a lot of pain, a lot of heartache.
Our behavior, our everything. Yeah. And we're talking to ourselves constantly in our head. And with all that chatter up there, it becomes a really busy place.
Yeah.
And it doesn't allow for just natural, organic, joyful times to come in, because during those times, you're talking to yourself so much about all the things that you're afraid of or that could happen or did happen or,
you live in fear.
It does. It takes away from all of your moments, the ones that could have been really good.
Yeah. It's like I had to relearn how to talk to myself, and that took years.
Oh, I know.
Years.
Let me tell you, I had to rewrite those tapes, and I still do all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's something you're always working on. I mean, like one thing I believe is like self-love, that internal dialogue. It's like a muscle, right? Like if I were to stop working out tomorrow, my muscles would completely go weak.
I'm living with that one.
Yeah,
for sure.
And so it's like you have to work on it all the time. You have to work on loving yourself and choosing you. And part of that is saying, like, knowing how to say no to people and learning how to do that. And that's a muscle that you have to build. And so there was so much growth that had to happen at that point. But step one for sure was getting out of that marriage, which I did. It was a painful exit, but it was an exit. And
I think step one was meeting that counselor.
Well, yes. Step one was meeting her. I mean, she just woke me up. I mean, I walked out of her office that day, like almost like scared, because I was like, what
am I going to do?
So much.
I'm going to do this now.
Yeah. There's so much to dig through here. I don't even know where to start, but she did.
She
and I
gave
leaned
you
on
the
her
confirmation that you can go ahead and leave your husband, because that's the right choice.
She's like, get out tomorrow. She goes, if she goes, the next time I see you, you better have paperwork filed. Like that's how adamant she was about it. She goes, I don't even want you in here unless you've already filed for divorce. Because I had talked about it for so long and just never done it because I was just too scared.
Yeah. And lots of people will just talk about it forever.
I know. And I get it, this culture that we live in, people are scared what other people are going to think. And, I'll just say this now. Yes, you will be judged. Like, it doesn't matter how you do it, how good, how bad. I mean, don't do it bad if you can help, help not to, but you will be judged, because there will be people who don't understand. There will be people that think you should stay in your marriage no matter what for the kids. I could not disagree with that more. Nothing was better for my kids than leaving my first husband, because my kids needed to see a healthy, good marriage. And I gave them that when I got remarried, a few years later.
And they needed to see you in a healthy environment. Just you by yourself. Yeah. And you wouldn't have been that.
No. Me staying would have been the worst thing I could have done for my 3 little girls. And I'm so grateful.
Those patterns would have kept going.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that's kind of where it all started, just in that therapist office. And so like with my book, that's where that dream was built, was after I was done working with her. I thought, man, one day when I'm ready, and I'm not ready now, but one day when I'm ready, I want to share this story. I want to share how it was so meaningful to me that after 20 years of these toxic relationships, I was able to see through the muck, so to speak. And I just thought, one day I'm going to share this story, as painful as it is, because I know there are people still living in it and they don't know how to get out. They don't know how to help themselves. They don't know how to work through their trauma, or they don't know how to get out of a bad marriage. And maybe one part of my story or something will resonate, and they'll think, yeah, I can do this. I can get out, or I can get past this pain. I have a friend of mine reading my book right now, and she messaged me yesterday and she goes, Aimee, like, this is changing my life because I'm in so much pain right now.
I think it's a perfect time for you to tell us the name of your book and where the people can find it when it comes out.
Yeah. So my book is out. So it's on Amazon right now. And I'm sure we can link something in the podcast. So it's called Turning Pain into Purpose.
Okay.
And the book really is just my story from being a child and what happened and kind of growing up. I talk a lot about the relationships I was in, just to really paint that picture of like, this is what my life looked like before I got help. And then I talk a lot about that journey with my therapist and where that led me. And then really the last, I'd probably say 7 or 8 chapters are really all about my life now and how I've really turned something painful into something beautiful, because that's something I just feel so strongly about. Like, we all go through pain. There's not one person who's listening to this who hasn't experienced something painful or is experiencing something painful. And I believe that our message always comes from our mess.
Yeah,
and
I do
we
believe.
can help other people with turning that into something beautiful. And so that's really what the ending of the book is about, is just those experiences. And then even as an adult, experiencing really painful losses, and then using that pain and turning it into something better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I have another tattoo that says the strength is in the struggle. And I
love that.
Truly believe that if I don't go through that struggle that's going to get me through it and not go around it, you know, like how we've done and brush it under the rug. We have to go through the struggle in order to get strong, to see the strength, and that it does make us stronger.
Yeah.
We're ultimately stronger than we were prior. And so you must be super strong.
Well, I think it's so interesting too, because I think like human nature, it's like we all want to grow and evolve and be better versions of ourselves, but we don't think like, oh, wait a minute, in order for that to happen, I'm going to have to go through something very difficult or very challenging to get to this other version or this other side, right? And we want it to be easy, and it never is.
Every time I get myself into like a mess, I'm like, why did I choose this goal?
I know, right?
And I'm only talking about the ones where it's like I had been through some trauma. I'm like, why did I pick a marathon? Why is there so many miles before the 24 that you have to train for? This is dumb.
Right.
But I'm not going to back out, but I'm still disappointed that I even committed myself to this. And then you get done, you're like, oh my gosh, that was the best thing ever.
It's so true.
But you do need to appreciate the journey before the finish line. And I think I also sometimes hate when I'm like cross the finish line, because I'm like, once I've learned to embrace all the little goals that you have to reach to get to the big goal, and you get to that big goal and you're like, but now what? Like what's that next thing going to be? And that's just a healthy mindset.
Yeah.
Those are struggles I'll take on all day long.
I know. I think it's important too to have like other goals that you're working on that are going to come after like a big one, like, like especially like if I'm training for an Ironman or whatever. I know following that race, I have other things that are going to come right after that, because there's going to be a bit of a letdown, so to speak, right? It's like
the transition
that transition of like, okay, I've been working for this big thing. I just crossed the finish line. Okay, there's my 10 seconds of glory. But, and it's not even that, because you train for the training, right? But it's after that event. Okay, now what am I working on next? What's something that's going to be important to me and that's going to push me and make me grow? Because if you don't have something following that, I think it's always a letdown.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's very good advice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
So with the book, so going back to your question, I know I kind of skipped around, but so the book's out on Amazon right now. The ebook is coming out probably in the next like 4 or 5 days. And then the audiobook should be coming out shortly right after that. It's all recorded and ready to go.
I love a good audiobook.
I know.
I
am
will be
so
on the
excited.
treadmill
Yes.
or on the pavement or on my bike, and I can just plug it in or out picking weeds, doing whatever. I love audio.
I love audiobooks. That's how I digest almost every book now. And so I knew from the very beginning I would want the audiobook, and I knew I would want to be the one reading it. In fact, I'll tell you a little story with my audiobook, which was recorded right here. But it was like a whole nother layer of healing I wasn't even expecting. And it was interesting talking to like Blake and Mallory about it too, is like we were recording, because I would come into these recording sessions and so many times I'd be like, okay, just stop for a minute, because I'm like sobbing. I'm like, why am I crying about this? Like, I remember I was telling the story. So this thing happened to me when I was 17. I was robbed at gunpoint and thrown in a dumpster. It was actually like a real big, scary thing.
Oh my gosh.
But I never talk about it, right? It happened when I was 17. I was robbed at gunpoint. It's like told at dinner parties, kind of a story. But I'm like actually now reading it from my book and kind of going into the details of the story. And as I'm talking about how traumatic this was, I'm literally like starting to cry. And I'm like, okay, stop the audiobook for a minute so I can tear up about this.
Yeah.
And I realized like, wow, like actually saying my book out loud has been like a whole nother layer of healing, because I'm like saying it with emotion. I'm not just writing it. So the audiobook for me was just almost like this beautiful next layer of healing that was really incredible. So I'm excited to listen to it myself, just because I know what it felt like to say it and to read it out loud.
I love that.
Yeah, it was powerful.
Yeah. I know that like sometimes I can listen to something and I get a lot from it, but sometimes I think it's important to read it too, because you can pick things out that you didn't hear. And vice versa.
Yeah. And I love reading because you can highlight things and go back to it. Sometimes I'll listen to an audiobook and I think, man, I wish I would have read this one because I would have highlighted so much. And then there's other
wrote
times.
It down.
Yeah. But then there's other times where I'll read it and I'll think, man, I wish I would have listened to this, because I wouldn't have been highlighting, but I think I would have digested it more by listening. So I think it's just kind of learning what senses like you need to digest certain information,
For sure. For sure. Wow. So, okay. So your brother, we'll go back to your brother in college, he apologized and you were like, no, it's okay. I forgive you. And you just didn't really want to process it, which is understandable.
I don't even think I knew enough to know that I didn't want to process it. It was just like, oh, yep, no, we're good.
That's the thing I don't think about. So we don't need to talk about it.
No, we don't talk about it. Like, you're good. Like, you have nothing to be sorry about. And also back then, if you think about it, I didn't know how it impacted me. I was in the middle of impact, right? I was mid-impact at 21 or whatever age I was, 20. And so it was like, in my mind, there was nothing for him to apologize for, because I couldn't see the impact it had on my life. When I went through therapy and I was able to literally rewatch the video of 20 years of my life in that therapist office and realize like, oh my goodness, it's impacted me here and here and here. And how is it impacting me right now with these stupid decisions I'm making? And how is it impacting me as I raise my daughters? And I mean, it was like the floodgates, so many layers of impact, right? That's when I could really see like, whoa. And so talk about like needing to forgive him again. I truly, not even again, I truly needed to forgive him actually at that phase of my life, because then I could see the impact it had on my life. And it wasn't just my brother I had to forgive. In fact, I will say even more than my brother was my parents, because there was a lot there with my parents that I felt like they didn't protect me in a way. And that was really painful for me to kind of look back on that and realize and look at how they handled it with him, with me. How they handled other situations after that, how they handled my relationships with men. My parents let me date 3 21-year-olds when I was in high school. Like, now that I've raised 4 girls, I'm like, what? How was that a thing?
Right.
Why did they let me date 3 men in their 20s when I was a sophomore in high school?
Yeah.
So there was a lot to let go of with my parents in terms of their parenting for me, which was pretty painful.
Do you have a relationship with him now?
Both my parents passed away years ago.
Okay.
But I will share this because, again, my therapist just changing my life in every way. But when we were mid-therapy, after a few months working with her, she said, and we started really, we were digging through so much, and a lot started coming up with my parents. And realizing like so much of this trauma had to do with not actually the trauma itself, but how they handled the trauma. And
people that you trusted in and at the time didn't know any better. But
they didn't know better. They didn't know better, And anyway, my therapist at the time said, Aimee, you need to talk to them. Like, you need to tell them how this impacted you. You need to tell them how you feel about it, how you felt about it then, how you feel about it now. You need to have these conversations. And I didn't want to, like, I pushed back. It probably took me maybe a month or two to even talk to my parents. But every day, I am so grateful that I did, because literally, this was in 2009. So these conversations happened at the end of 2009. At the beginning of 2011, my dad died. And at the end of 2011, my mom died. So I lost them both in that year. And
did they ever try and make you feel like those things didn't happen, or to the degree, or diminish your feelings or thoughts or anything you said? That's so good. I'm so glad
they
to hear that.
were.
That is great.
I could talk about this forever, and I'll always cry about it, because they were so apologetic.
Yeah.
They were so sorry. They just didn't know how to do it better. Yeah. They didn't have the skills. They didn't have the awareness. They didn't have what we have today. And, sometimes I think about this too, right? Just like, in fact, I heard a quote once, and it's always stuck with me. It said, I wish all kids knew that their parents were here for the first time too.
Yeah.
And I think back to those times, and I think, okay, if I was a mom and I had one kid who was the perpetrator and one kid who was the victim, would I not feel just as much love for the child who was doing it as I would for the child who was suffering?
You would protect them both. You would
instinctively to protect them both. And
you let them off easy. And I think that was part of what you did. You're like, I'm going to give, them this. I'm not, this fine. We can just forget it.
Yeah.
But it's so good that you circled back.
So good that I circled back, because we had many beautiful conversations, and I was able to say everything I needed and wanted to say. And they were so great and wonderful and loving and apologetic. And it created such a different bond between us. And it also made my divorce, because all these conversations were happening kind of mid-end divorce at that time. And it just made all of that just be smoother for me to know that my parents were on my side, and they understood, and they knew, like, even my divorce, even marrying my first husband, it was like my dad kind of pushed me into it a little bit. And he was even having that conversation with my dad. Like, I leaned on you to protect me. And when I came to you and said, I don't think I should marry this guy, and you pushed me to do it, like, here I am 13 years later trying to get out of a very toxic marriage. So there was a lot of
them to unpack, because that's 13 years of your life that could have been different.
Yeah.
Had they just done one little thing different, or not letting you date the 21-year-olds, and then not encouraging you to marry a guy that maybe they could have seen that wasn't necessarily a great fit for their daughter, or, there were some red flags or whatever situation, just little tiny things that could have been different from the people that we look to for advice and encouragement and to lead the way, could have saved you from 13 years but all those things were a learning experience for you. And you went through all that, and being able to share it with your parents for 2 years before they passed. And now you can write the book,
Yes.
And it's like that full circle really does make a difference. I'm happy to have anybody on the show that wants to share their struggles, but I do know that, like, when they've gotten to a place where they're working on their struggles, or even graduated to a place where they've healed and can actually forgive, the people that have scorned them or misled them, it's such a better show.
Yeah. Because you can use that trauma to, like, build from. And So there was just so much there to unpack with them. And I'm just so grateful that she really pushed it, because she pushed it hard. I originally didn't want to.
She sounds amazing.
She was an incredible woman. She was amazing. And she was even there all those years with my kids. Like when
What's her name?
Her name was Judy Brady.
Judy Brady. She's from around here?
She lived up in Salt Lake.
Okay.
Yeah, Kaysville area.
Did you meet her in person or?
Yeah, I met her in person.
Every time?
Yeah. Well, at the beginning, yes, for sure. A few years ago, when I went through another really painful part of my life, I circled back to her and started working with her again. And again, she changed my life all over again, 15 years later. And she worked with all my kids, met with her. I mean, she just impacted our whole lives, our whole family.
Here's something I would like to talk about to our listeners is if anybody out there has a counselor that has changed their life, that they feel is doing such great work, I'd love to hear about them. I'd love for you to comment, send either of us a message letting us know about that person, because those are the people that we need in this world. And I would love to, have them on the show, refer them out to people. They're needed.
They're so needed. Counselors that know how to listen, ask the right questions, especially, and also that have the experience and the education to know when, wait a minute, this isn't adding up. It's like my therapist knew with me, like, wait a minute, the story that you're telling me here isn't lining up with what you're telling me here.
Yeah.
And she knew how to dig deeper because those things weren't adding up. Where other therapists I had seen in the past hadn't really known to do that. And I mean, obviously everyone has their specialties and things like that, but I would love if anyone has therapists that they know, like, hey, they're really good at this or they've done it enough.
Yes,
they have the experience. Yeah. Because there are people that I have people that have reached out to me.
That's a resource.
That is a huge resource.
I know that they're probably booked full.
Yeah, totally.
They might have an extra hour here or there. And, if we can get enough of those resources and get them out too and put them in the description in the podcast and share that with people who are struggling, and with technology nowadays, you can have a Zoom conversation with somebody and it can be just as impactful. I mean, it's just the conversation.
Yeah. And it's just finding the right person and the right people that can help. So it's life-changing.
You have to trust them. There can't be an agenda on their part.
Yeah.
They're not there for them. They're there for you. And
one thing I want to say about therapy too, because I think sometimes, myself included, for years, like we have this mentality of like, oh, I can figure this out. I can figure it out. Well, I have a couple thoughts on that. One, if we could figure it out, we would have already figured it out.
Yeah.
Like, okay, like if I could do it myself, I would have already done it, right?
Yeah.
The second thing is, if there's a pattern in your life that you can't see, you need someone with a different lens to be able to see it for you. And that's what she did for me, right? Like she was like, if you look at it, like she had a pair of glasses, I had my pair of glasses. I could only see my life through my pair of glasses until I was able to see it through someone else's lens. And that's what she provided for me was a new outlook on life and a new outlook on my life, my situation, my past. And I think sometimes when people think like, oh, I don't need help, they're not thinking big enough. They're not realizing like you need a different set of eyes on what you cannot see. Because when you're in it, you can't see it for what it is. And I mean, all my kids that have broken up with guys or whatever, like my daughters, I'll be like, man, I couldn't see it when I was in it. I was like, you never can.
Right.
None of us can.
And it's not just about a conversation, then somebody asking you, well, how did that make you feel? We're not just talking about our feelings of what we went through in a certain situations. They're uncovering things that we literally have closed and thrown away the key on.
Yeah. So it's like when you're in it, when you're in the thick of it, you can't ever see it for what it is until you're out of it. I remember after my first divorce, I had a friend say to me, man, you are so much happier than you used to be. And I was like, was I unhappy? Like, I didn't know that. Was I unhappy? And she goes, well, I don't know if I would have called it that back then, but now I see you now. Man, you're like a bright light compared to how you were for 13 years. And I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, for 13 years, I was so dim because I was so unhappy and miserable. And I couldn't see that. I never could have seen it.
That's interesting. So for me, I had to go through a lot of work, 7 years of counseling every week as well. And I feel like I always had this bubbly personality because I was growing in other areas of my life, but I was dysfunctional. Like my mental state was dysfunctional. I would be jealous over somebody who had 2 puppies that got more love than I ever did in my life, but I wouldn't talk about it.
Yeah.
But it would come out in other ways. And it was a lot of dysfunction that I had to work through. And I had to go back to the core of, what happened from early on till, and work through it all and go, oh, that's why I'm jealous of a Labrador. I don't know. It's so silly.
Yeah, right.
Or, a family member that has such a great life, or that they're loving on their kids like they should. And I didn't get that opportunity, as a single mom, just trying to figure it out. And so, yeah, it's so different. Like everybody's process and growth and what they need to work on.
Yeah. Well, and don't you think too that sometimes, myself included, people think that like, okay, I'm going to heal from this and then I'll be good. And one thing I just continue to learn, and I want to say like I've learned it, but I know it's just this continual learning. We're never healed because we're always going to be healing. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I went through this really beautiful experience actually. And in that process, another layer of healing, showed up for me. And I was like, wow, I didn't even know I needed this next layer of healing that actually had to do with my father. It went back to that core abandonment wound with my dad a little bit that I didn't even realize was deeper than I thought it was. And you think about all the work I've done in writing a book about all these things, and here again, another layer shows up for me. And it just was another reminder that the work's never done. The healing journey is never over. It's just evolving.
Yes. And the thing is that unless you've gone through going to a counselor, learning all of these tools, being aware of what we're doing and the self-sabotage we could be doing to ourselves, but now we've got these tools in place, right? So now we know how to tackle them. And it's so cool because now I'm like, no, that's wrong. That first thought was wrong of yours,
Yeah.
First thought, wrong thought. Like I'm okay with it. I can admit it. Or if I've in a moment where I'm like behaving badly, being a little stubborn, whatever.
Yeah.
And I really think on things now. And I'm like, no, you need to not let that go. Like you have to dive deep. What was your thought process on that? You were feeling some sort of way because you behaved poorly.
Yeah.
And then like talk about it with that person because that's what's going to help you,
I love that. It's like learning as like we get older. And I feel like I go through the same thing that you're talking about, where it's like, I learn to kind of dissect now. Is this something I need to continue to talk through with someone, or is this something I actually need to just let go of? Mm-hmm. And it's knowing the difference. And that's hard sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I don't like grudges. I don't like stubbornness. Yeah. If that's happening, I have to look within and go, what is it? That's something on me. When I see it in other people, that seem very put together. Like I have a lot of healthy people in my life.
Yeah. But
because they haven't had to go through things to where they've had to learn some tools, they don't even realize that I'm like, you're just being stubborn right now. Okay. This drama, right? But they have never had to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
They've never had to process their behavior because it's been so far and few between. You know, it's not something that needs to check yourself into a counselor for.
Right.
So, I mean, we all have dysfunctions and behaviors that need to be checked. But because we've been through counseling, we're well aware of them.
Yeah.
And especially right when we're doing it or right after, it's like, oh God, I did it again,
Or even like realizing like when you're triggered, like I actually had a conversation with someone a few hours ago and I got off the phone and I was like, why was that kind of triggering for me? And honestly, as I was like doing my hair and makeup for tonight, I was thinking that like, that's what I was processing as I was getting ready, is I was like, why was I triggered by that? That's so interesting.
Yeah.
And didn't feel a need to go back and revisit it with that person, but it was just actually having the conversation with myself. In fact, I joke around about this all the time. Like I'm always talking to myself. I talk to myself 100%. More than I talk to anyone because I'm always having these conversations with myself for one reason or another. But today it was just like, hey, why why did that trigger me? It shouldn't have. There was no reason
Yeah.
it should have, but it did. And so then I'm like, okay, there's something to dissect here, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like there are people out there in the world that actually, like, without saying it, you know, they're intentionally trying to trigger you. Maybe they're in a mood or saying something.
I probably, yeah, I would think so.
The fact that we don't have to address it with them because, like you said, you went and you processed it and you realized I don't need to be triggered by that, but it did.
Yeah, it did. So then that's something internal for sure.
And then you were able to let it go, which just means that you didn't give your power away there.
Yeah. And then sometimes you're triggered by something where you're like, okay, I actually probably need to revisit this because there's something here to talk about
that hasn't been resolved.
Mm-hmm. Maybe it's part of that relationship or whatever the dynamic is.
Mm-hmm. And maybe it is a bad relationship, or sometimes it's not 100% healthy.
Yeah.
And I am that person sometimes. I'm the side that's not, you know, I still have work to do. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, if I cause that in that person, sometimes it's my daughter because my daughter and I are so close.
Yeah.
You know, and when I have a frustrating moment or something and she's the one I can like lash out on, and it's not healthy.
Yeah.
And I've gotten better at it, but it's like, I hate that I felt that it was okay to do that to my daughter because I've put myself through so much stress during my day. I've taken on too much, you know, I'm stretched thin. But those people that love you and you see, you know, your husband, your daughter, your son, you can kind of lash out for a minute and you think it's okay because, you know, you're not doing it in the general public, but it's really just not.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Just learning all those behaviors, I think.
Yeah, because you're imprinting on them at that point, and then they can go home to their husband or, you know, kids someday. And so that's something like, I'm totally working on that because yeah. I appreciate you coming and opening up, and I apologize if I got a little talked about myself a little bit too much there with your story.
No, not at all. I love that you shared it.
I relate so much to.
No, it's so powerful, I think, when you're talking about a story and sharing similar experiences, because I think we all go through so many similar things, and the more people that can share, wait, I've been through this or I've experienced something like that, it gives permission for other people to be able to share what they've been through and let it go. And it, you know, like kind of like what we were talking about earlier, it's like when we hold it in, we lose our power because we're not releasing it. We're not letting it go. And when we have the ability to do that, one, it teaches us that doesn't hold us captive. And it's okay to talk about this stuff. It's okay to talk about how when I was 12, this happened to me and I was sexually aroused. Like, I'm not afraid to share that anymore. It doesn't bother me because it happened and it's real and it's a real part of my life. And so I just think it's powerful when we can share.
Absolutely. I know so many people, I'm sure have already benefited from listening to your podcast, but it continues here and with your work, with your book. So I'm really excited to pick up a copy.
Yes, I would love that. Thank you.
And get to know you more. So yeah, is there anything else you want to share? I mean, the floor is yours.
Not that I can think of. I mean, I would love if like anybody listening to this can just think of someone that they think could benefit from my book. Please share it. That would mean so much to me. And that's why I wrote it. And it's like every person that I hear from that reads it and it benefits their life, it means the world to me, because I think we all have something powerful inside us to share. And this is just my way of doing it. You know, I mean, all of us are going to do it in different ways and share our stories in different ways, but this book is super special to me, and it took me a long time.
You put a lot into it.
Yeah, thank you. And it took me a long time to even have the courage, not only the courage to write it, but then after I wrote it, to have the courage to publish it. And I even remember the day that I clicked the button to publish it. I was so afraid. I was so scared. And now that fear's gone. I mean, that's the thing with fear, right? It's so imagined, but you just let that fear go, knowing like this is going to change lives, and it's okay. The people that need to read it are going to read it, and the people that won't. But all I care about is the people that need it, not the people who don't.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You're here for a healing for yourself and others.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's going to have a huge impact. Even if it's a huge impact on one person,
yeah,
it's a huge impact. but I'm sure it's going to affect more than that. And yeah,
Thank you. And thank you for having me here and being able to spend this time with you. I'm so grateful. So thank you.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing. And this is my third time hearing it. It's been different every time that I've listened to your story. And so this time was quite different than the other two times. There were different parts of your journey when you told those stories. And I've gotten so much out of each time. And it does help me with my own struggles. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Honestly, I've loved talking to you about it. Like it's different talking about it with another woman, to be honest, than a man. Just because I know you understand a piece of this, just being a woman, that you hear it differently. Mm-hmm. And that means a lot too. So
yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's good for everybody because we live in a world where men, women, men that have chromosomes that are, different from birth, and like we live in a whole new world now. Like there's, them and we and us and how we identify. And I feel like I don't know very much about it, but there's so much to uncover there. And I feel like we think that men don't understand. I know, I understand because I've lived a life of this with men. But there's so many stories out there that.
So many.
It's just.
It's painful.
Yeah.
But it's like no matter what the story is, men, women, all of us, like we all have something to learn from each other and something to share. And I think that's the most important thing.
Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.